with the selfie. Take it away.
All right. Yes, my name is Richard Lewis. I'm a doctoral student at the Free University of Brussels under Yoni. And I'll just go ahead and jump right into it. So I want to start right at the middle. It's the Museum Selfie Day, and it's the 4th annual Museum Selfie Day, January 18th of this past year. And so I've been doing research all fall on this subject, and I was very excited to actually have that phenomenological experience. And I got in there, and it was the Yukio exhibit, and it was very popular, and it became dramatically obvious that I had forgotten a huge chunk of research, or an idea that I did not expect at all, and that was all the other people in the museum. So let me step back and we'll go back into it. So my research really covered 3 different areas, really grounded in post-phenomenology, and I'm doing an interdisciplinary PhD between philosophy of technology and communications. I was looking at communications media and museum research, and then specifically looking into selfie research. And I'll just go briefly through some of these. So in museum research, one of the interesting things that I found is that the Stedelijk Museum in Amsterdam in 1952 was one of the first museums to start augmented reality tours with their audio tour. And so it's a way for visitors to get an extra layer of experience. And the most current, I'm really blowing really quickly through a bunch of museum research. I mean, we could go on and on and on about this, but the most recent current research is really looking at the visitor focus. Museums have changed dramatically over the years, but currently they're really trying to figure out, why do visitors go to museums? What's their intention of being in a museum? And Falk just came out in 2009 after 25 years of studying this, and with the clarity for him that the visitor's primary goal is to construct the self, that they're doing that to create their identity in some way. And that was in 2009 and 2010, and Falk in his book does not mention the selfie at all. So a year later, 2010, with the iPhone 4 release with the front-facing camera and the apps that connect to social network, we had the explosion of selfies. And in 2013, the Oxford English Dictionary named it the word of the year. And in 2014, Google estimated that there are 93 million selfies being posted a day just on their Android network. Oh, and I meant to start this. Okay, so I know we're mostly philosophers in here, but I'm giving you permission not to overthink. And you can answer both questions. So I want you to raise your hand if you just have a general sense, a general feeling, kind of on the anti-selfie, just if you feel like selfies aren't that great a thing. Okay. And how many would answer that the selfies are, they're good enough, they're okay.
Good enough.
Okay, and about 80% of you choose not to vote. That's so that whole research project, that whole window of participation. So doing this research, it became clear that there's really 2 aspects to the selfie. There's selfie as action, so the taking of the selfie, and then there's selfie as object, kind of the non-material artifact of the. And so we'll be looking at both of those components. And this was a really nice quote, I thought, that selfies are not considered self-portraits, but are rather portraits of the self in the act of self-portrayal. It's just brilliant. And there's some various fields of research that are currently looking into selfies, especially sociological and cultural studies in identity, and tourism and leisure research. One of the components on underrepresented groups there's a lot of research showing that they really like that the selfie is very positive, because I read several statements saying with the selfie is the first time I liked a picture of myself, an image of myself, because they had control of that, and they could actually create their portrayal to the world, and they had that power to do that, that they'd never liked pictures other people took of them. And that's one of the things I was looking at. So what do selfies afford? And it's that self-construction. And it's also, there was the session the other day about fluidity. And I think the fluidity of identity, because selfies do have this sense of fun to them, or not too seriousness, some components. Now there's some very serious selfie genres that are out there, but it allows you to play with your identity. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So in tourism research, John Urey and the latest Tourist Gaze 3.0 with Larson was identifying how the idea of network travel. So tourists are going out, and they're not necessarily taking pictures of things and bringing them back home and then having a slideshow to show their friends. Instead, they're out there in real time taking these images and saying, this is not where I was, but this is where I am right now at this moment. And their social network can add and reflect back to them, saying, oh, I was there 2 years ago, go to this cafe, it's really great. Or so they're getting an additional information. They're sharing it in real time. And I like this quote as well, rather than fetishizing, I don't think I'm saying that, fetishizing the extraordinary at the tourist destination, tourists seek to capture the extraordinary within themselves. So what I'm looking at really is in museum selfies, how is the visitor relating to that museum object? But there's this niggling thing in the back of my mind, why are selfies so often disparaged? And disparage is a nice way to say how some people really feel about selfies, especially in museums. So we'll go on from there, and so in using the postphenomenological lens, starting off with Don's eye technology world, I really look at the two primary ways I'm looking at this is through the embodied relations and hermeneutic relations, though alterity could play a role, but I'm just focusing on these first two. Then I look at the multi-stability, and then I will wind up with the mediation of technology and looking at the two-sidedness of enabling and constraining. So that first component of what selfies can be, that selfies is action. And this is for the embodied relation. So like eyeglasses embody, when you're taking the selfie, you're typically turning your back to the object, and you are looking through your screen, and you're composing yourself with that object, and you're creating that relationship. There's all sorts of different abilities. You can add filters, so you can actually change, so you can really augment that reality as you're doing it in time or after you've created it. There's ways of augmenting it. And the original embodied relation is the eye technology with the intentionality of the world. I would modify that slightly for selfies and put a small I in there with the world. And so the small I is that objectified or constructed self. And it's looking at the I as object with the world. And so you have another relationship that's happening with the selfie that's being taken. And that's that it's not the big I, but it's the constructed I. And I find that really interesting. However, so again, this isn't like a pair of glasses helping you see better. This is limiting your ability to see, and there's that danger as you're kind of trying to compose that perfect picture, and you're getting closer and closer to that statue. And this was irreparable damage to St. Michael. There's been really several. There's 3 ones that I know about where there's been damage to museum objects from selfie takers. It's bad. So the second relation I want to look at is the hermeneutic, and that's the selfie as object or artifact, non-material. And again, the original, the eye in relationship to the technology and world, and slightly modified with the selfie, eye, and again, the technology being the selfie, but the eye-world relationship, the small I objectify self. And I think I like these formulas, and I think they're kind of fun to play with. I think a lot of us do. Oh, well, how can we tweak it this way or that way? This is just another way of it's playing with these relations. And so looking at reading a selfie. So one of the issues, I'm a photographer, so I'm not a normal selfie taker. I take occasional selfies, but I have a background in photography. I'm a semi-professional photographer, typically nature photography. So I have certain goals that I want to be doing, and certain standards that are interesting to me. And this picture I found quite interesting because this is one that's very focused on the self. There's no museum object here, right? There's the museum, and museum is an object, and part is one of the relations as well, versus another selfie where it could be very much focused on the museum objects, and that the self can kind of be on the side or kind of more hidden to the background of the image. So you have different abilities of how to read selfies, and what is that relationship that's being portrayed. And that's what I'm finding very, very interesting. So, and this kind of brings up the multi-stability of the museum selfie. And then there's cultural multi-stability. There's the culture of selfie takers. And so there's that whole culture can be very much more accepting of selfies, and you might not get the same resistance to something versus a culture of people who don't take selfies, don't understand them, and don't see the need, and actually just see them as this externalized thing that's very superficial and kind of disrespectful, I think, for being in a museum. There can be that viewpoint to that. But also the specific multi-stability of the object itself. So I can have my intention, what I mean when I look at my selfie of the museum and how I read it. I could have, but once I share it, then it gets outside my control. And this kind of goes into that designer fallacy. It turns into potentially different things. Here's one that I wanted to show me contemplating this figure of the Easter Island head. But I know my cousin, who's a smart aleck, and she would definitely come back and say, why are you kissing this object? Because she would kind of read it in her own very humorous way. And potentially if it went out and went to a viral meme, I don't want to know what possibilities could be given back to me. But again, this is me, this is my objectified self, and once you share that, it can go, you have no control anymore when it gets out there. So back to the Museum Selfie Day. Museum Selfies Day was started by Mara Dixon. It's really international. And museums can choose to participate or not. I was excited to participate just because I'd done all this research and I wanted to actually see what it was like. Unfortunately, this museum that I was at in Brussels wasn't celebrating it, wasn't advertising for it. I was the only selfie taker that I saw there. And it was a very popular thing. And this was the big shock for me, and that I went in there. And so what I expected through my research, because I was looking at how the non-neutrality of technology mediation happens. And I know that the technology is going to change the visitor's experience somehow. And what I expected when I went in there is that my scene as a visitor wanting to take a selfie, my relationship to objects would be filtered and dominated by my desire to create a selfie. This is what I expected. This was my big takeaway. And what would be backgrounded is an immediate relationship to the object, just me and the object, which is, I would say, a normal way to do it, even though you could definitely say every relationship is mediated by museum marketing, framing, lighting. There's a lot of more subtle mediation that's happening. But I'm looking at the gross, non-subtle subtlety of a selfie. So that's what I expected, and what I experienced when I went in there with a very busy place. My whole world went down to, is anyone looking? So I'm slightly neurotic, I'll admit that. I'm more of an introvert than an extrovert. And so I felt very foolish to be out there taking a selfie in front of it and being the only person. And I can recognize that this could change if I was with a big group of friends that were all taking selfies, or if the whole museum was big celebrated, International Museum Selfie Day, and there was everybody taking selfies, I would have felt less self-conscious. But as it was, I was very, very, very self-conscious. And so that was my primary, it's like 90% of my attention was wrapped up in just how can I navigate, find a place where not very many people are looking. And this is all mental, this is in my head, because, well, I wouldn't really catch people's eyes to see if they were glaring at me or not, but I did not see anybody give me any negative feedback. So it was all self-imposed mental issues. Take it up with my therapist later. And then my second part was then, after I kind of found a spot where I felt like I was subtle, how can I make an interesting selfie? My next two, how can I make an interesting selfie with the object? And then every once in a while I would have that direct experience, the direct appreciation. But again, it was all drop down one. So this is what I experienced in there. This selfie really sums it up for me. I think it captures that because the object it's off, it's not even there, and it's really the influence of all the people. It's artistic for me, that's important as a photographer, and I just really liked how that one turned out, and I felt it captured my experience pretty well. So this brings me back to my aha moment of putting this all together. Before I say that, I'm going to have to do a quick story because my daughter, she's a sophomore in college, just had an experience. She was taking a feminist art history class, and they were studying paintings, obviously. Went to a museum at the end, and she had just found this beautiful, beautiful kind of impressionistic painting that she was just deeply emotionally affected, transformed with. And she looked over and saw three of her classmates going from painting to painting, taking selfies. And she was really pissed. She was a fiery redhead, and she was not happy at all. She was really angered by this. And so what is that? What is that thing that can really piss people off in selfies? At least my daughter, which is pretty easy too. And so my aha moment was looking through the lens of technological mediation, starting with the most broad, just IDs enabling constraining, Robert's field of awareness, that's bringing it down to a more focused, and then Gaelic on her wonderful book, The Wall Window of the Cell Phone, that understanding the cell phone through that idea of a wall window. So it gives you a window to your virtual community, but the more you focus on that, the more you wall off your proximate community. And this is where I think what was happening to me and with selfie takers in the museum. And rereading this, there was ethics. Kieran was talking about he was looking at 4 different ways of talking about it. One of it was ethics and involving alienating. And I think that's where I can see my daughter making that judgment of that technological mediation, because my action was involving my virtual community, but it was alienating the proximate community, the real community around me. And I think that's where the anger comes from, and that's where the issue comes from. And so that's using that post-phenomenology is, I felt like I had a bit of a breakthrough on understanding that. So the two-sidedness, it's a benefit to the individual, but it can be an irritation to those that you're excluding. So what can museums do? Instead of saying yes, no to selfies, ask how. And through policies and really design. So how are you lighting? How, as a photographer, it's really obvious when it's too dark to take a selfie. You know, unless you put your face right up against the painting that's lit up, it's going to be blurry and not a good one. So lighting, displays, the glass cases, how far, how close you can actually get to the place. But you can also do what are called hybrid spots. So this one museum, the Belvedere, had a selfie point. And by actually having established selfie points, it also communicates to both groups, selfie takers, non-selfie takers, this is what to expect, and this is where you don't do it. It's a really intriguing idea, and I think communication is really important, is managing people's expectations. Because we are in a conflict of two different paradigms that are clashing right now. And so in summary, I think I'm up. Yes, I'm up. So, right, so visitors go to museums for identity construction, and selfies support this. Selfies connect visitors with their social network and share and participate, augmenting their own experience with their social network as it happens. But they alienate the other physically present visitors around them, and that's an issue. And for me, it was learning not to lose sight of the broader relations. So I got focused in my research on the specific research of me, the selfie taker, the museum object. And what opened my eyes was that all these relations, all these technological relations that we look at and analyze are in a very complex, interrelated, multiple relations happening all at once. And the importance of praxis and research. It's like, okay, stop studying, get in there and actually do it. Oh, wow, that's an eye-opener.
My favorite was when you were backing up into it. That was a really great performative moment. Take a selfie with this one.
Thank you very much for your talk. Do you not think that the prejudice against the selfie is a particularly Western idea, that there's something to do with three things: the myth of Narcissus, the Protestant disapproval of mirror gazing, and the identification of this self-gazing activity as a particularly female activity?
Yes, I think, so I keep on there's so many influences. There's various, I try to stay away from determinism or really strict looking at things, but absolutely. And my focus was primarily through Western, European, American ideas. And that's why I did want to just briefly put in that cultural multistability, because in different cultures, that it could be just very, very, very acceptable.
Because I mean, the selfie is associated with the Asian wars.
Right.
Yes,
and yes, I was just hearing stories about that last night. Yes.
Yes.
Just quick things. This also brings to mind other instances. It's not with the camera used in the selfie, but like if you go to visit the Mona Lisa, the big thing about it is trying to get the picture of the Mona Lisa, and it really informs how people engage in that space and relate to it. And so it's interesting to see that what you really would just see with one work of art, the Mona Lisa, you now have this kind of camera-person engagement in general. And maybe if you could think of that and how that relates to selfies, that it was between just documenting a work and then putting yourself in it, like with Mona Lisa. The other thing is I'm thinking of, I was in Venice a few years ago, and they had the no selfie sticks.
Yes.
And that, I think, is interesting, because that adds another kind of dimension. You can go from the very discreet, like, to the, hey, so.
Yes, my friends were just down in the Louvre in front of Mona Lisa, fighting elbows out and getting jarred and pushed, and their son got pushed to the ground And people are just pushing them through, right? You get 15 seconds, that's it, you're pushing through. And it's a bizarre experience now. And there's another place right at the top of the stairs, which is a pinch point, where it's the perfect place to take a selfie. So museums really need to start thinking about design for this and how, because it's a big experience.
And whether they like it or not, that's
yes, exactly. And photography, I mean, I'm a photographer, so I've done a lot of research on photography, and it really didn't even touch on that. The Susan Sontag, and I have a great quote by Barnes, but yes.
Peter Paul?
Yeah.
I don't know the order after Peter Paul.
Maybe add another anecdote to the Louvre. So when I was there with one of my kids 2 years ago, the guard there said that we were not allowed to take a selfie because you will not stand with your back to us and Mona Lisa.
Wow. And it's true, but and especially different cultures, like if you put your feet pointing towards something, it's a big insult.
But that's also kind of a question, because you try to analyze how it adds to some kind of an eye world, something, but studying what it does to the way in which we look at art and how artworks become meaningful might actually be also a really interesting thing. So are the artworks indeed only some kind of a decor for our own personal lives, or does it open a new way of engaging with artworks as well?
And that's what I was, especially at start, is that whole engagement. So I think a lot of museums are very pro this idea, because you're engaging the visitor with your museum objects, and this is what they want. And so, but it's doing it in such a way that can be somewhat educative. They can control it so they're not upsetting a whole group of people. You know, can it be done in a respectful way? Because I think there is that, especially in heritage. Heritage is culturally rooted in this, and it's quite important. And so that's a big,
Kirk.
So, so you say that this selfie is kind of this self-construction, right?
Self-construction?
Yeah, or self. And so I've often wondered, because I don't quite understand selfies myself, but I see people take them, and so your picture, or your presentation helped me understand a little bit more why people do it. So then, and this might get at why people are frustrated with it, is it seems to me that if it is an act of self-construction, then it's a self-construction by identifying myself with something else by mere association. It's sort of a shallow association. In fact, it's an association that's a gazing association, which is kind of a consuming one, where you're not actually engaging it, right? And it would really piss somebody off if you thought art was important, right? You think the primary function of art is to engage and get. So this might be part of it. Is it has this kind of superficial self-identity through association, which is really mere association or something like that. Is that, or I mean, is that seem reasonable, or what's your take on that?
That I definitely identify with that component as well, and I haven't fully gone down that. I know there's some really political selfies that are very people are very much in danger, and they're capturing that, and it's a very, very serious genre of selfies, and selfies run the gamut of being totally superficial and nothing to them. For me, I tried to make them at least somewhat artistic, and have some kind of meaning relation going on. But it's very easy to stay superficial with selfies, and I think it's more of a challenge to get that depth. And I think it's a new paradigm, and potentially as we move forward, it will deepen like some of the.
I think that's right. I mean, the idea that there are genres of selfies, that in itself, it shows that this activity is kind of maturing.
Yes. Yeah.
Let's call it there.
Okay.
Thank you very much.